we are on the fourth story. The Prince and the Princess. The next time that Gerda was forced to rest, a big crow came hopping across the snow in front of her. For a long time he had been watching her and cocking his head to one side, and now he said, "Caw, caw, good day, good day." He felt kindly inclined toward the little girl and asked her where she was going in the great wide world, all alone. Gerda understood him when he said alone, and she knew its meaning all too well. She told the crow the whole story of her life and asked if he hadn't seen Kay. The crow gravely nodded his head and cawed, "Maybe I have, maybe I have." "What? Do you really think you have?" the little girl cried, and almost hugged the crow to death as she kissed him. "Gently, gently," said the crow. "I think that it might have been little Kay that I saw, but if it was, then he was forgotten you for the princess." "Does he live with the princess?" Gerda asked. "Yes. Listen," said the crow, "but it's so hard for me to speak your language. If you understand crow talk, I can tell you much more easily." "I don't know the language," said Gerda. "No matter," said the crow. "I tell you as well as I can. In the kingdom where they are now, there is a princess who is uncommonly clever, and no wonder. She has read all the newspapers in the world and forgotten them again. That's how clever she is. Well, not long ago, she was sitting on the throne. That's by no means as much fun as people suppose. So she fell humming an old tune, and the refrain of it happened to run, "Why, oh why, shouldn't I get married?" "Why, that's an idea," said she. And she made up her mind to marry as soon as she could find the sort of husband who could give a good answer when anyone spoke to him, instead of one of those fellows who merely stand around looking impressive. That's so tiresome. She had the drums dubbed to call together all her ladies in waiting, and when they heard what she had in mind, they were delighted. "Oh, we like that," they said. "We were just thinking the very same thing." "Believe me," said the crow, "every word I tell you is true. I have a tame lady love who has run of the palace, and I had the whole story straight from her. Of course this lady love was also a crow, for birds of a feather will flock together." The newspapers immediately came out with a border of hearts and the initials of the princess, and you could read an announcement that any presentable young man might go to the palace and talk with her. The one who spoke best and who seemed most at home in the palace would be chosen by the princess as her husband. Men flocked to the palace, and there was so much crowding and crushing, but on neither the first nor the second day was anyone chosen. Out in the streets there were all glib talkers, but after they entered the palace gate, where the guardsmen were stationed in their silver-braided uniforms, and after they climbed up the staircase lined with footmen in gold-embroidered linen, they arrived in the brilliantly lighted reception halls without a word to say. And when they stood in front of the princess on her throne, the best they could do was to echo the last word of her remarks, and she didn't care to hear it repeated. It was just as if everyone in the throne room had its stomach filled with snuff and had fallen asleep, for as soon as they were back in the streets, there was no stopping their talk. The line of the candidates extended all the way from the town gates to the palace. I saw them myself, said the Crow. They got hungry and they got thirsty, but from the palace they got nothing, not even a glass of lukewarm water. To be sure, some of the clever candidates had brought sandwiches with them, but they did not share them with their neighbors. Each man thought, just let him look hungry and the princess won't take him. But Kay, little Kay, Jan interrupted. When did he come? Was he among those people? Give me time, give me time. We're just coming to him. On the third day, a little person with neither horse nor carriage strode boldly up to the palace. His eyes sparkled the ways yours do, and he had a handsome long hair, but his clothes were poor. Oh, that was Kay, Yada said and clapped her hands in glee. Now I found him. He had a little knapsack on his back, the Crow told her. No, that must have been his sled, said Yada. He was carrying it when he went away. Maybe so, the Crow said. I didn't look it carefully, but my tame lady love told me that when he went through the palace gates and saw the guardsmen in silver and on the staircase the footmen in gold, he wasn't at all taken aback. He nodded and said to them, It must be very tiresome to stand on the stairs. I'd rather go inside. The halls were brilliantly lighted. Ministers of state and privy councillors were walking about barefoot, carrying golden trays in front of them. It was enough to make anyone feel solemn, and his boots creaked dreadfully, but he wasn't a bit afraid as he walked straight to the princess, who was sitting on a pearl as big as a spinning wheel. All the ladies in waiting with their attendants and their attendants' attendants, and all the lords in waiting with their gentlemen and their gentlemen's men, each of whom had his page with him, were standing there, and the nearer they stood on the door, the more arrogant they looked. The gentlemen's men's pages, who always wore slippers, were almost too arrogant to look as they stood there at the threshold. That must have been terrible, little Jan exclaimed. And yet Kay won the princess? They say he spoke as well as I do when I speak my Crow language, or so my tame lady love tells me. He was dashing and handsome, and he was not there to court the princess but to hear her wisdom. This he liked, and she liked him. Of course it was Kay, said Jana. He was so clever that he could do mental arithmetic even with fractions. Oh, please take me to the palace. That's easy enough to say, said the Crow, but how can we manage it? I'll talk it over with my tame lady love, and she may be able to suggest something, but I must warn you that a little girl like you will never be admitted. Oh, yes, I shall, said Jada. When Kay hears about me, he will come out to fetch me at once. Wait for me beside that stile, the Crow said. He wagged his head and off he flew. Darkness had sent it in when he got back. Caw, caw, he said, my lady love sends you her best wishes, and here's a little loaf of bread for you. You simply can't get into the palace with those bare feet. The guardsmen in silver and the footmen in gold would never permit it. But don't you cry, we'll find a way. My lady love knows a little back staircase that can lead up to the bedroom, and she knows where they keep the key to it. Then they went into the garden and down the wide promenade, where the leaves were falling one by one. When one by one the lights went out in the palace, the Crow led little Jada back to the back door, which stood ajar. Oh, how her heart did beat with fear and longing. It was just as if she were about to do something wrong. Yet she only wanted to make sure that it really was little Kay. Yes, truly it must be Kay, she thought, as she recalled his sparkling eyes and his long hair. She remembered exactly how he looked when he used to smile at her as they sat under the roses at home. Wouldn't he be glad to see her? Wouldn't he be interested in her hearing how far she had come to find him, and how sad they all had been when he didn't come home? She was so frightened, yet so happy. Now they were on the stairway. A little lamp was burning on a cupboard, and there stood the tame crow, cocking her head to look at Gerda, who made her courtesy as her grandmother had taught her. "My fiancé has told many charming things about you, dear young lady," she said. "Your biography, as one might say, is very touching. Kindly take the lamp and I shall lead the way. We shall keep straight ahead, where we aren't apt to run into anyone." "It seems to me that someone is on the stairs behind us," said Gerda. Things brushed past, and from their shadows on the wall they seemed to be horses with spindly legs and waving manes, and there were shadows of huntsmen, ladies and gentlemen on horseback. "Those are only dreams," said the tame crow. "They come to take the thoughts of their royal masters off to the chase. That's just as well, for it will give you a good opportunity to see them while they sleep." Now they entered the first room. It was hung with rose-colored satin embroidered with flowers. The dream shadows were flitting by so fast that Gerda could not see the lords and ladies. Hall after magnificent hall quite bewildered her, until at last they reached the royal bedroom. In the middle of the room 2 beds hung from a massive stem of gold. Each of them looked like a lily. One bed was white, and there lay the princess. The other one was red, and Gerda hoped to find little Kay. She bent one of the scarlet petals and saw the nape of a little brown neck. Surely this must be Kay. She called his name aloud and held the lamp near him. The dreams on horseback pranced into the room again as he awoke, and turned his head, but it wasn't little Kay at all. The prince only resembled Kay about the neck, but he was young and handsome. The princess peeked out of her lily-white bed and asked what had happened. Little Gerda cried and told them about herself and about all that the crows had done for her. "Poor little thing," the prince and princess said. They praised the crows and said that they weren't at least a bit angry with them, but not to do it again. The prince got up and let Gerda have his bed. It was the utmost he could do. She clasped his little hand and thought how nice the people and birds are. She closed her eyes and fell peacefully asleep, and all the dreams came flying back again. They looked like angels, and they drew a little sled on which Kay sat. He nodded to her, but this was only in a dream, so it all disappeared when she woke up. The next day they asked her to stay at the palace and have a nice time there, but instead she begged them to let her have a little carriage, a little horse, and a pair of little boots, so that she could drive out into the wide world to find Kay. They gave her a pair of boots and also a muff. They dressed her as nicely as could be, and when she was ready to go, there at the gate stood a brand new carriage of pure gold. On it the coat of arms of the prince and princess glistened like a star. The coachman, the footman, and the postilions, for postilions there were All wore golden crowns. The prince and the princess themselves helped her into the carriage and wished her Godspeed. The forest crow, who was now a married man, accompanied her for the first 3 miles and sat beside Gerda, for it upset him to ride backward. The other crow stood beside the gate and waved her wings. Inside the carriage was lined with sugared cookies, and the seats were filled with fruits and gingerbread. Fare you well, called the little prince and princess. Little Gerda cried, and the crow cried too, for the first few miles. Then the crow said goodbye, and that was the saddest leave-taking of all. He flew up into a tree and waved his big black wings, as long as he could see the carriage, which flashed as brightly as the sun. 5th story. The Little Robber Girl. The carriage rolled on into a dark forest. Like a blazing torch it shone in the eyes of some robbers. They could not bear it. That's gold, they cried. They sprang forward, seized the horses, killed the little postilions, the coachman and the footman, and dragged little Gerda out of the carriage. How plump and tender she looks, cried the old robber woman, who had a long bristly beard and long eyebrows that hung down over her eyes. She looks like a fat little lamb. What a dainty dish she will be. As she said this, she drew out her knife, a dreadful flashing thing. Ouch, the old woman howled. At just that moment, her own little daughter had bitten her ear. This little girl, whom she carried on her back, was a wild and reckless creature. You beastly brat, her mother exclaimed, but it kept her from using that knife on Gerda. She shall play with me, said the little robber girl. She must give me her muff and that pretty dress she wears, and sleeps with me in my bed. I want to ride in the carriage, the little robber girl said, and ride she did, for she was too spoiled and headstrong for words. She and Gerda climbed into the carriage, and away they drove over stumps and stones into the depth of the forest. The little robber girl was no taller than Gerda, but she was stronger and much broader in the shoulders. Her skin was brown and her eyes coal black, almost sad in their expression. She put her arm around Gerda and said, "They shan't kill you unless I get angry with you. I think you must be a princess." "No, I'm not," said little Gerda, and she told about all that had happened to her and how much she cared for little Kay. The robber girl looked at her gravely, gave a little nod of approval, and told her, "Even if I should get angry with you, they shan't kill you, because I will do it myself." Then she dried Gerda's eyes and stuck her own hands into Gerda's stuffed warm muff. The carriage stopped at last in the courtyard of a robber's castle. "Tonight you shall sleep with me and my little animals," the robber girl said. After they had something to eat and drink, they went over to a corner that was strewn with rugs and straw. On sticks and perches around the bedding roosted nearly 100 pigeons. They seemed to be asleep, but they stirred just a little when the 2 girls came near them. "They're all mine," said the little robber girl. She seized one that was nearest to her, held it by the legs, and shook it until it flapped its wings. "Kiss it," she cried, and thrust the bird in Gerda's face. "Those 2 are the wild rascals," she said, pointed high up the wall. to a hole bored with wood and sticks. Rascals of the woods they are, and they would fly away in a minute if they were not locked up. And here is my old sweetheart, Bay, she said, pulling at the horns of a reindeer that was tethered by a shiny copper ring around his neck. We have to keep a sharp eye on him, or he would run away from us too. Every single night I tickle his neck with my knife blade, for he is afraid of that. From a hole in the wall she pulled a long knife and rubbed it against the reindeer's neck. After the poor animal had kicked up its heels, the rubber girl laughed and pulled Gerda down into the bed with her. "Are you going to sleep with that knife in bed with you?" Gerda asked and looked at it a little frightened. "I always sleep with my knife," the little rubber girl said. "You can never tell what may happen. But let's hear again what you told me about the little Kay and why you are wandering through the wide world." Gerda told the story all over again. The little rubber girl clasped one arm around Gerda's neck, gripped her knife in the other hand, fell asleep and snored so that one could hear her. But Gerda could not close her eyes at all. She did not know whether she was to live or whether she was to die. The rubbers sat around their fire singing and drinking, and the old rubber woman was turning somersaults. It was a terrible sight for a little girl to see. Then the wood pigeon said, "Cuckoo, we've seen little Kay. A white hen was carrying his sled, and Kay sat in the Snow Queen's sleigh. They swooped low over the trees where we lay in our nest. The Snow Queen blew upon us, and all the young pigeons died, except us. Cuckoo." "What is that you're saying up there?" cried Gerda. "Where was the Snow Queen going? Do you know anything about it?" "She was probably bound for Lapland, where they always have snow and ice. Why don't you ask the reindeer who is tethered beside you?" "Yes, there is ice and snow in that glorious land," the reindeer told her. "You can prance about freely across those great glittering fields. The Snow Queen has her summer tent there, but her stronghold is a castle up near the North Pole on an island called Spitsbergen." "Okay, little Kay," Gerda sighed. "Lie still," said the rubber girl, "or I stick my knife in your stomach." In the morning Gerda told her all about the wood pigeons had said. The little rubber girl looked quite thoughtful. She nodded her head and exclaimed, "Leave it to me, leave it to me." "Do you know where Lapland is?" she asked the reindeer. "Who knows better than I?" the reindeer said, and his eyes sparkled. "There I was born, there I was bred, and there I kicked my heels in freedom across the fields of snow." "Listen," the rubber girl said to Gerda. "As you see, all the men are away. Mother is still here, and here she'll stay, but before morning is over she will drink out of that big bottle, and then she usually dozes off for a nap. As soon as that happens, I will do you a good turn." She jumped out of bed, rushed over and threw her arms around her mother's neck, pulled at her beard bristles and said, "Good morning, my dear nanny goat." Her mother thumped her nose until it was red and blue, but all that was done out of pure love. As soon as the mother had tipped up the bottle and dozed off to sleep, the little rubber girl ran to the reindeer and said, "I have a good notion to keep you here and tickle you with my sharp knife. You are so funny when I do. But never mind that. I will untie your rope and help you find your way outside, so that you can run back to Lapland. But but you must put your best leg forward and carry this little girl to the Snow Queen's palace, where her playmate is. I suppose you heard what she told me, for she spoke so loud and you were eavesdropping." The reindeer was so happy that he bounded into the air. The rubber girl hoisted little Gerda on his back, carefully tied her in place, and even gave her a little pillow to sit on. "I don't do things halfway," she said. "Here, take back your fur boots, for it's going to be bitter cold. Here are my mother's big mittens, which will come up right to your elbows. Pull them on. Now your hands look like my ugly mother's big paws." And Gerda shed happy tears. "I don't care to see you blubbering," said the little rubber girl. "You ought to be pleased now. Here, take these 2 loaves of bread, and this ham along." Gerda waved her big mittens to the little rubber girl and said goodbye. Then the reindeer bounded away over stumps and stones, straight through the great forest, over swamps and across the plains, as fast as he could run. The red streaks of light ripped through the heavens with a noise that sounded like sneezing. "Those are my old northern lights," said the reindeer. "See how they flash." And on he ran, faster than ever, by night and day. The loaves were eaten and the whole ham was eaten, and there they were in Lapland. 6th story. The Lapp Woman and the Finn Woman. They stopped in front of a little hut, and a makeshift dwelling it was. The roof of it almost touched the ground, and the doorway was so low that the family had to lie on their stomachs and crawl in and out of it. No one was at home except an old Lapp woman, who was cooking fish over a whale oil lamp. The reindeer told her Gerda's whole story, but first he told his own, which he thought was much more important. Besides, Gerda was so cold that she couldn't say anything. "Oh, you poor creatures," the Lapp woman said. "You've still got such a long way to go. Why, you will have to travel 100 miles into Finnmark, for it's there that the Snow Queen is taking a country vacation and burning her blue fireworks every evening. I'll jot down a message on a dried codfish, for I haven't any paper. I want you to take it to the Finn woman who lives up there. She will be able to tell you more about it than I can." As soon as Gerda had thawed out and had had something to eat and drink, the Lapp woman wrote a few words on a dried codfish, told Gerda to take good care of it, and tied her again onto the back of the reindeer. Off he ran, and all night long the skies cracked and swished as the most beautiful northern light flashed over their heads. At last they came to Finnmark and knocked at the Finn woman's chimney, for she hadn't a sign of a door. It was so hot inside that the Finn woman went about almost naked. She was small and terribly dowdy, but she at once helped little Gerda off with her mittens and boots, and loosened her clothes. Otherwise the heat would have wilted her. Then the woman put a piece of ice on the reindeer's head, and read what was written on the codfish. She read it 3 times, and when she knew it by heart, she put the fish into the kettle of soup, for they might as well eat it. She never wasted anything. The reindeer told her his own story first, and then little Gerda's. The Finn woman winked a knowing eye, but she didn't say anything. "You're such a wise woman," said the reindeer. "I know that you can tie all the winds of the world together with a bit of cotton thread. Won't you give this little girl something to drink that will make her as strong as 12 men, so that she may overpower the Snow Queen. 12 strong men, the Finn woman sniffed. Much good that would be. She went to the shelf, took down a big rolled-off skin and unrolled it. On this skin strange characters were written, and the Finn woman read them until the sweat rolled down her forehead. The reindeer again begged her to help little Gerda, and Gerda looked at her with such tearful, imploring eyes that the Finn woman began winking again. She took the reindeer aside in a corner, and while she was putting another piece of ice on his head, she whispered to him, "Little Kay is indeed with the Snow Queen, and everything there just suits him fine. He thinks it is the best place in the world, but that's because he has a splinter of glass in his heart and a small piece of it in his eye. Unless these can be gotten out, he will never be human again, but the Snow Queen will hold him in her power. But can't you fix little Gerda something to drink that will give her more power than all those things? No power that I could give her could be as great as that what she already has. Don't you see how men and beasts are compelled to serve her, and how far she has come in the wide world since she started out in her naked feet? We mustn't tell her about this power. Strength lies in her heart, because she is such a sweet, innocent child. If she herself cannot reach the Snow Queen and rid little Kay of those pieces of glass, then there's no help that we can give her. The Snow Queen's garden lies about 8 miles from here. You may carry the little girl there and put her down by the big bush covered with red berries that grows in the snow. Then don't you stand there gossiping by hurry to get back here." The Finn woman lifted little Gerda onto the reindeer, and he galloped away as far as he could. "Oh," cried Gerda, "I forgot my boots, and I forgot my mittens." She soon felt the need of them in the knife-like cold, but the reindeer did not dare to stop. He galloped until they came to the big bush that was covered with red berries. Here he set Gerda down and kissed her on the mouth, while big shining tears ran down his face. Then he ran back as fast as he could. Little Gerda stood there without boots and without mittens, right in the middle of icy Finnmark. She ran as fast as she could. A whole raiment of snowflakes swirled toward her, but they did not fall from the sky, for there was not a cloud up there, and the northern lights were ablaze. The flakes skirmished along the ground, and the nearer they came, the larger they grew. Gerda remembered how large and strange they had appeared when she looked at them under the magnifying glass. But here they were much more monstrous and terrifying. They were alive. They were the Snow Queen's advance guard, and their shapes were most strange. Some looked like ugly overgrown porcupines. Some were like a knot of snakes that stuck on their heads in every different direction, and others were like fat little bears, with every hair a bristle. All of them were glistening white, for all were living snowflakes. It was so cold as little Gerda said a Lord's Prayer, she could see her breath freezing in front of her mouth, like a cloud of smoke. It grew thicker and thicker, and took the shape of little angels that grew bigger and bigger the moment they touched the ground. All of them had helmets on their heads, and they carried shields and lances in their hands. Rank upon rank they increased, and when Gerda had finished her prayer, she was surrounded by a legion of angels. They stuck the dread snowflakes with their lances and slivered them into 1,000 pieces. little Gerda walked on unmolested and cheerful. The angels rubbed her hands and feet to make them warmer, and she trotted briskly along the Snow Queen's palace. But now let us see how little Kay was getting on. 7th story. What happened in the Snow Queen's palace and what came of it. The walls of the palace were driven snow. The windows and doors were the knife-edge wind. There were more than 100 halls. All were lighted by the flare of the northern lights. All of the halls were so immense and so empty, so brilliant and so glacial. There was never a touch of gaiety in them, never so much as a little dance for the polar bears, at which the storm blast could have served for music, and the polar bears could have whirled about on their hind legs to show off their best manner. There was never a little party with such game as blind bear's bluff, or hide the poker sheaf for the cubs, nor even a little afternoon coffee over which the white fox vixens could gossip. Empty, vast and frigid were the Snow Queen's halls. The northern lights flared with such regularity that you could almost time when they would be at their highest and lowest. In the middle of the vast empty hall of snow was a frozen lake. It was cracked into 1,000 pieces, but each piece was shaped so exactly like the others that it seems to work of wonderful craftsmanship. The Snow Queen sat in the exact center of it when she was home, and she spoke of this as sitting on her mirror of reason. She said this mirror was the only one of its kind, and the best thing in all the world. Little Kay was blue, yes, almost black with the cold, but he did not feel it because the Snow Queen had kissed away his icy tremblings, and his heart itself had almost turned to ice. He was shifting some sharp flat pieces of ice to and fro, trying to fit them into every possible pattern, for he wanted to make something with them. Kay was cleverly arranging his pieces in the game. To him the patterns were highly remarkable and of the utmost importance, for the chip of glass in his eye made him see them that way. He arranged his pieces to spell out many words, but he could never find the way to make one word he was so eager to form. The word was eternity. The Snow Queen had said to him, "If you can puzzle that out, you shall be your own master, and I'll give you the whole world and a new pair of skates." But he could not puzzle it out. "Now I am going to make a flying trip to the warm countries," the Snow Queen told him, and away she flew. Kay sat all alone in that endless, empty, frigid hall and puzzled over the pieces of ice until he almost cracked his skull. He sat so stiff and still that one might have thought he was frozen to death. All of a sudden little Gerda walked up to the palace through the great gate, which was knife-edged wind. But Gerda said her evening prayer. The wind was lulled to rest, and the little girl came into the vast, cold, empty hall. Then she saw Kay. She recognized him at once, and ran to and threw her arms around him. She held him close and cried, "Kay, dearest little Kay, I found you at last." But he sat still and stiff and cold. Gerda shed hot tears, and when they fell upon him, they went straight to his heart. They melted the lump of ice and burned away the splinter of glass in it. He looked up at her, and she sang, where the roses bloom so sweetly in the vale, there shall you find the Christ child without fail. Kay burst into tears. He cried so freely that the little piece of glass in his eyes washed right out. Gerda, he knew her and cried out in happiness, "My sweet little Gerda, where have you been so long? And where have I been?" He looked around him and said, "How cold is it here? How enormous and empty." He held fast to Gerda, who laughed until happy tears rolled down her cheeks. Their bliss was so heavenly that even the bits of glass danced about them and shared in their happiness. When the pieces grew tired, they dropped into a pattern that made the very word that the Snow Queen had told Kay he must find before he became his own master and received the world and a new pair of skates. Gerda kissed his cheeks and they turned pink again. She kissed his eyes and they sparkled like hers. She kissed his hands and feet and he became strong and well. The Snow Queen might come home now whenever she pleased, for there stood the order for Kay's release written in red letters of shining eyes. Hand in hand, Kay and Gerda strolled out of that enormous palace. They talked about grandmother and about the roses on the roof. Wherever they went, the wind died down and the sun shone out. When they came to the bush that was covered with red berries, the reindeer was waiting to meet them. He had brought along a young reindeer mate who had warm milk for the children to drink and who kissed them on their mouth. Then these reindeer carried Gerda and Kay first to the Finn woman. They warmed themselves in her hot room, and when she had given them directions for their journey home, they rode up to the Lab woman. She made them new clothes and was ready to take them along in her sleigh. Side by side, the reindeers ran them to the limits of the North Country, where their first green buds were to be seen. Here they said goodbye to the two reindeer and to the Lab woman. Farewell, they all said. Now the little birds began to chirp, and there were green buds all around them in the forest. Through the woods came riding a young girl on a magnificent horse that Gerda recognized, for it had once been harnessed to the golden carriage. The girl wore a bright red cap on her head and a pair of pistols in her bed. She was the little robber girl who had grown tired of staying at home and who was setting out on a journey to the North Country. If she didn't like it there, why, the world was wide, and there were many other places where she could go. She recognized Gerda at once, and Gerda knew her too. It was a happy meeting. "You're a fine one for gadding about," she told little Kay. "I'd just like to know whether you deserve to have someone running to the end of the earth for your sake." But Gerda patted her cheek and asked about the prince and the princess. "They're traveling in foreign lands," the girl told her. "Now you tell me what has happened to you and how you caught up with Kay." Gerda and Kay told her their story. "Snip, snap, snurre," said the robber girl. So everything came out all right. She shook them by hand and promised that if she ever passed through their town, she would come to see them. And then she rode away. Kay and Gerda held each other by the hand, and as they walked along, they had a wonderful spring weather. The land was green and strewn with flowers, church bell rangs, and they saw the high steeples of a big town. It was the one where they used to live. They walked straight to grandmother's house, up the stairs, and into the room where everything was just as it was when they left it. And the clock said, tick and its hands were telling the time. But the moment they came in the door, they noticed one change. They were grown up now. The roses on the roof looked in at the open window, and their two little stools were still out there. Kay and Jan sat down on them and held each other by the hand. Both of them had forgotten the icy, empty splendor of the Snow Queen's palace, as completely as if it were some bad dream. Grandmother sat in God's good sunshine, reading to them from her Bible. Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Kay and Jana looked into each other's eyes, and at last they understood the meaning of their old hymn. Where the roses bloom so sweetly in the vale, there shall you find the Christ child without fail. And they sat there grown up, but children still, children at heart. And it was summer, warm, glorious summer.